All right, welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is a Comprehensivist Wednesday that we do in collaboration with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. Today, we're going to be talking about what we do. It's going to be a self-reflective meetup. It's going to be a conversation about conversation. And we really want to do a thorough job of this, because if we learn something from it, it's going to benefit us every single day. And it's going to benefit us personally in our own lives too. So let's do a good job of it. We're going to do this in 4 stages. The first stage is for triggering our memory. It is asking the question, what is a good conversation? What do you think is a good conversation? Or what are the characteristics of a good conversation? There, you're trying to be as brief as possible to put your ideas down. Now, I invite everybody to do that. So it's going to be an amazing collection of ideas that are going to trigger our mind, to prime our mind to be talking about good conversation. So that's the first stage. The second stage is about values. Why do you value good conversation? What does a good conversation do for you? What is the impact on you? And there, you can talk at length. You can talk between 2 to 5 minutes on what good conversation does for you. Okay, that's the second stage. The third stage, we are leveraging our imagination. We're going to ask, what does, if good conversation was the norm, what would it do to the world? What would the world be like if everything that we have discussed about good conversation? So just let your imagination go while see what would be the impact. It doesn't have to be immediate, let's say 50 years from now, or you can think about 500 years from now. If this was the norm, what would the result be? Okay. And the final one is going to be practical. We're going to bring everything that we have read into focus and saying, so what should you do? What can you practically do to improve your conversation? What will you do? From everything, you can talk about something that you have found useful or any idea that has been discussed that you find useful. But there, the focus is going to be on practical things of saying, how can you make your conversations better? So those are the 4 stages. And finally, I will ask, your reaction to our meetup. Okay, how we did. All right, so that's the plan. So let's get started. So the first question, what is a good conversation and what are the characteristics? What do you think are the characteristics of good conversation? Remember, you have these 4 things. So I would recommend that use piece of paper, keep track of all these 4 things of what you want to talk about. And that way we can, make the most of this conversation. All right, this section, try to be brief. Next section, you can talk as much as you want. Okay, between 2 to 5 minutes. Evanique, what is a good conversation?
A good conversation is good listening, as well as being clear. And I think also being willing to learn something new and being able to accept that your opinion or your point of view may not be the best point of view, and being open.
Wonderful. Excellent. Next up is going to be, give me just a second here. Next up is going to be DLJ followed by Joe. DLJ.
Evening all. Yeah, so I think I'm going to echo the second bit that Evanique just said. Same with a good book, same with a good movie. I think a good conversation is something that's triggered me. It's made me rethink things, or I've learned something new, which I think is what Evanique said, the second point.
Excellent. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, Maxine, Vanessa, Judy, and Jen. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I'll also echo the importance of listening, but the best way I've heard a good conversation described in the past as something that it has a center without any sides, where people are not coming from their perspective. I think it also requires a certain level of respect is a characteristic of a good conversation, and suspending your own judgment as well. And knowing when to speak is actually a very important part of a good conversation. So timing, I would say, would not be another aspect of it.
Wonderful, wonderful, excellent, excellent set of points. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Maxine, followed by Vanessa. Maxine.
Good conversation has to be between two people. One can't be speaking all the time while the other is listening. There has to be an even exchange, and they have to listen to each other, not just listen to what they're saying themselves.
Wonderful, beautifully put. Thank you. Next up is going to be Vanessa, Judy, Zhang, Nicole, and Becky. Vanessa.
Well, I think a good conversation is maybe when you have more things different than you have in common or different opinions, unless it's got a narrow focus, kind of fluid and dynamic, you know, casual, and maybe also knowing, like, not exactly a safe word, but realize, okay, maybe we should either hit pause or change the topic. And I think respect is key. And so, like I said, just taking everything in and maybe agreeing to disagree. Sometimes, like I said, you start at one place and, you know, maybe have not set in stone rules, but kind of guidelines, and see where it takes you. And sometimes it's better with a stranger than with someone you know.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. Next up is Judy, followed by Zhang. Judy.
I think that body language is really important. Smiling, eye contact, being calm, just interested, not just in what you say, but also what your body is saying. So the body language is really important, besides all what everybody else has said, which is, you know,
Wonderful.
as important as everything else.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Great point. And it's great to kind of keep adding. You can feel free to repeat anything anybody has said. You don't need to respond to anything anybody has said, but keep adding more things as well. Thank you. Zhang, followed by Nicole. Zhang.
Yeah, I think good conversation is first you have some mutual understanding between each other. And so you have the similar kind of background knowledge. Second, you have to be able to expand each other's knowledge on top of that. So that's, I see as good conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. Next up is Nicole, followed by Becky. If anybody else wants to share, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Nicole.
Demontre is going to speak.
Go ahead.
It's good conversation. No, go ahead.
Good conversation is just anything about God.
He said about God.
One.
Oh,
The one God.
wonderful. Thank you. Nicole, you want to add anything?
You know, I think that good conversation is really about listening, proactive listening, and not judging someone, really being interested in another person and trying to get on their level, no matter what their circumstances are, no matter who that person is or whom that person is. That it's really important to feel into the situation and not think about the situation so much, but to feel, use your intuition. I think that intuition makes a really good, makes for good conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Next up is Becky, followed by Praveen. Becky.
Okay, so I said that I wrote, good conversation is a reciprocation of articulate communication and accurate reception with content that is valuable to both parties, done through a humble attitude in search of truth. And I wrote articulate communication, but to Judy's point, communication is both verbal and nonverbal, and accurate reception, because it's not always about what is said and the content. It's also about reading the subtext, the tone, what's implied, the connotation, and accurately. So there's no purposeful obfuscation. There's minimal misunderstanding, and there's no ego.
Wonderful. That was amazing. If you could put what you wrote in the chat, that would be great. Thank you. Next up is going to be Praveen. Praveen, go ahead.
So I think good conversation is something, if you do a transcript of your conversation, there's no non sequiturs, like not individual sound bites. So I think focusing on the transition in between the two speakers or multiple speakers, I think a lot of times in the moment, it might sound like a good conversation, but after the fact, you realize you were talking at each other, not really interacting with each other or not reacting to each other.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Praveen. Next up is Katie, Jeff, and Addie. Katie.
So I have 2 points. My first point relates to Judy's. I think people might be at first trying to impress or be funny, but I think the most important thing is just to be interested in the person you're talking to, and a genuine interest. And then my second thing is I was around great communicators and I would kind of analyze how they talked. And I think sometimes with a lot of people, they use a lot of I, and then with people that are great communicators, they're often using it is, and kind of being careful of how much attention you're kind of drawing to yourself. Just like small grammar changes can make you sound like a lot more outwardly focused than, like you're trying to pull it into yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Great points. Next up is going to be Jeff, followed by Addie. Jeff.
So I would offer that one aspect of great conversations is that the individuals involved are aware of whatever fear they are feeling and are able to manage it in a genuine, mature way.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. All right. So now let's move to the next question. Hopefully this has primed us, just amazing set of observations. So now the question is on values. Why good conversation? What does it do for you? What have you gained from great conversations? This could be one-on-one conversations. It could be group conversations. This could be conversations in a business context, family context, friend context, public context, any context. Why are good conversations important to you? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Again, I want to remind you, this is the second part, second question. The third section is going to be using our imagination to say, if good conversation was the norm in the society, what would things look like? How would society look different? So that is engaging of imagination. And the last part is going to be, what practical things can you do to improve your conversations? And then we're going to have comments on how this entire meetup went. Okay, so that's the structure. We are on number 2. The question is, why is good conversation of value to you? What do you get from it? It's going to be Evanik, Mike, and Joe. Evanik, here, please take your time. 2 to 5 minutes is fine. Go ahead. This is the longest part of the entire meetup.
Yeah, I love good conversation because first of all, you get to know who people are. I think you get to learn more about a person and their beliefs and their values when you are genuinely interested in what they're saying. I think secondly, you get to learn so much, and you learn so much about yourself when you're talking to other people, because if you're listening, you can also see if you're judging a person, if you're listening just to speak, and then you can ask yourself why. And I think good conversation leaves you with something that you get to go home or go to where, to go to a private place and think on it, right? And then you reflect on what that conversation was about and who you were being in that conversation. Like for me, it's all about, was I listening to the person during that conversation? What did I take from it? And then also ask the question, do you think that person took something away from you? And if you're listening, usually what happens is, yeah, they do take something away from you. And relational wise, you get to build friendships. You also get to know who you are and speak up for yourself. And you also learn how to treat other people by building those friendships. Because then as you're getting closer to another person and building the friendship with the other person, they get to know your likes and dislikes, and you get to know their likes and dislikes, and you know what to say, you know what boundaries not to cross. And I think you learn how to love people through conversation. In the Bible, it says love is an action. So when you're listening to a person, you take that action. When you love a person, you take what they say and you respect them for who they are. So I think learning how to love through a conversation is great. And you grow in love for people through conversation because you learn who they are. And the more you learn who they are, the more you respect them. On the other hand, I think you also get to know people's motivations and you can act accordingly. When you're in that conversation, you may not particularly like what that person is saying, and you might not even like their opinion. And you may not be best friends with everybody, but you get to walk away with knowing who you don't want to be, as well as who you do want to be. So you can take qualities from the person that you want to see in yourself and adapt it. And then you can look at the other person and say, I don't like that particular quality of that person, because you're listening to them. But then you can look at yourself and be like, do I exhibit that quality? And so that time of self-reflection is like, why does that person tick me off? Why does that person is so off-putting to me? Like, is there something in me that is reflected in that other person? And this is that I would like. So you can do a lot of self-reflection. You can learn a lot about yourself, and you can learn how to love others through a great conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Avanique. Just so many great points. Great. Thank you. And it's like, I like the connection between, knowing others and knowing yourself, the respect and love, and that connection making it possible for you to learn more about yourself. So it's like at the same time, you're learning more about them and yourself. So this is very similar to the idea of Carl Rogers of authentic relating, which, that's what he focuses on. Thank you. Next up is going to be, let's go with Maxine, followed by Mike. Maxine.
I think a good conversation gives you energy. It gives you validity to your feelings. And it makes you feel more alive and that you have something worthwhile to say.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I like the point about validity because we are social beings. So it's like mirroring, it's like you can see the same things operating in the other person and you can say, oh, they see it too. So there is that validating, and it also results in that energy because it's like affirming what you think is important. So great points. Thank you. Next up is Mike, followed by Joe, Vanessa, Nicole, and Judy. Mike.
Yeah, I think a good conversation is like a conduit or a gateway to flow. It's one way to break it down for me. As I just look around, as I've gotten to know some of you personally, I mean, Shrikant, I had the pleasure of driving from Philly with you in a car, and that's over a 2-hour ride to New York. And I don't know where the time went. There was no dead air, and that conversation just made time disappear. And again, there's others that I'm looking at here that I could say the same. So again, like music or dance or anything that you participate in, where you suddenly look at the watch and go, oh, shoot, I should have been out of here a long time ago. So it engrosses you, not all conversations, but I think the good ones really take you away somewhere. So I'll just channel it into the concept of flow.
Just to give you an example, I was sitting at a cafe yesterday, and a couple who has been to just one of the meetups walked by, and they noticed me and they stopped by, and we had a conversation for 3 hours, and they forgot that they had put their car, they had to take care of their car, and they, unfortunately, by the time they went back, the car had been towed. so it was a fascinating conversation. Thank you. Next up is Joe.
So I think actually I'm going to hit on the most important part, which is, learning about yourself and learning from others as well. I mean, so in that process. So and there's another aspect of it too. I think it provides you a good conversation, starts to provide you with context from what the other person's perspective and where they're coming from. And that kind of opens up things for yourself. So if I'm talking to somebody from a different country or a different part of the world or things along those lines, I'm starting to develop a more nuanced understanding of the human experience itself. And as I start to integrate that, then you start to have this, you start to be able to articulate your own feelings in a more accurate way. And ultimately, in a way, it allows us to solve problems, right? It allows us not only to solve, we're talking about, big kind of, issues that may be facing humanity and things along those lines, but they allow us to solve our own problems as well. So it allows us to get to some degree of truth, the more feedback that we're getting. And the best conversations I've had with many people that are actually on the screen right now have really revealed things about myself that allowed me to overcome some of my fears. And so in that process as well, what I've also been able to do is not only overcome my fears, but I've also been able to overcome my biases. Some of the biases that I've had where I also know if I'm listening or not. That's another aspect of it where, so I'm a little bit all over the place, but it's such a great question. But so one thing is that I also know where I am even psychologically. If I'm not listening to someone else, if I'm not hearing them, then I know that I'm actually thinking more about myself, and that's highly problematic. So that I actually need to, kind of get outside of my own self within that. So there's a certain wisdom that comes along with all this, with a good conversation that allows you to live a more fulfilling life. So I think that there's a number of things that that we can go into. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
We'll have plenty of opportunity of going through it, but the thing that I'm going to focus on what you said, the idea that I found really kind of key is the idea of context. Because no matter how much we try, our context is limited. We always have limited context, and the world is much larger than whatever our experience possibly can be. And genuinely having a conversation with another person is the cheapest and the most effective way of expanding the context, because they have the context in them. Their life is different. Their way of processing things are different. Their background is different. They're just different. So their context is different. And if you're actually interacting with them and actually listening to them, it allows you to expand your context. And that allows you to overcome your biases, point out things about you that you had not noticed, because it's kind of like foil for you. Who you are is a foil, it's kind of given. Whereas when you see comparatively with another person, they say, huh, they don't operate that way. What's going on here? So it's like it's a way of seeing something in you. So I think that I really love the point about the context. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Nicole, Judy, Becky, and Praveen. Nicole.
Hello.
Hi.
Trey, do you want to say anything? He wants to speak from the heart. He is a little bit shy, so I will speak on behalf of the both of us.
Sounds
And
good.
I think a good conversation makes you cry. He said, thank you. He has schizophrenia. So communication is a little more nonverbal than verbal. And when it is verbal, it is, Malik, please. It's a complicated situation I found myself in, Shrikant, with some guys from Yemen. And some, you foreigners have a different way of moving through the world, especially when you come to America. And I've found that the best way to communicate is to be very raw and vulnerable, and to speak from the heart, and to be as authentic as possible, because to play any kind of a game with anyone is to mislead them and have them think that you're someone that you're not. And I never, ever want to do that again to anyone in my life.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Really appreciate that. I think the issue of vulnerability is a huge issue, because that's what it means to actually have a conversation, because you are actually kind of keeping yourself open to what the other person is saying. And so thank you.
He's threatening to have me arrested again. I've been arrested 3 times in the last month for standing my ground.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Next up is going to be Judy.
Okay, so the question is, why good conversations? And my question is, why not? That's basically, I have to define good and I have to define conversation to come with some kind of an answer. And my answer is that conversation can turn into something else if you don't really know what you're getting into when you are going to think that you're going to have a conversation with someone. So I think there should be some preparation for a conversation, maybe kind of be aware of, is it good for you? Is it really going to be a conversation? Is it going to be a discussion? Is it going to be what are you getting into when you say, hey, let's have a conversation? I'd love to hear what made your 3-hour conversation a good one, because I think that you probably could give us more guidelines on this. But yeah, I just, depending on the outcome, I think you have to think about what is it that is good and what is it that is conversation before you even start a conversation. Kind of think a little bit, reflect.
Excellent. I like the point of saying, okay, what is the purpose of a conversation? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Wonderful. Next up is going to be Becky, Praveen, and Connie. Folks, go ahead and type ! To share why you value good conversation. What is it that you value? What do you get from good conversations? Becky.
Good conversations allow mutual connection between people. When stripped away of fluff and insincerity, your raw, honest thoughts are morphed, shaped, and crafted by the engagement. It gives you a line to the other person's values and being, and also to yours. It's leaving you enlightened and the other person feeling understood. And good conversation leaves people changed and for the better.
Wonderful. Very, very well put. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, the connection on that point, the idea that we are learning from Bhagavad Gita of Namaste, of saying that the God in me greets the God in you, that you're trying to connect at the deepest level. I think that's the most profound idea I've found on conversation, on kind of relating to other human being, because you're kind of saying, okay, I'm trying to relate to the deepest part of you. And then in that context, all the disagreements, all the differences take a completely different role once that kind of mutual connection is established. Thank you. Next up is Praveen, followed by Connie. Praveen.
So I like to make a distinction between conversation versus debate or argument. I think in our society sometimes, like, the point we get off track. We're trying to win the conversation, just like you win the debate, right? You're defending your ground, like Nicole was saying, as opposed to actively engaging and actively hearing. But I think like the point is that we have to accept the people that we're conversing with where they are, rather than trying to change them, and then create the open space for constructive feedback if they choose to take it, but don't push it on them. So I think that point of view, that's the growth I think that Becky, in my opinion, we could have without actually having to win the argument or win the conversation per se.
No, that's a great point, because what happens is that most people, I have to tell you a story, because because I've been doing these conversations in New York in person for a long time. And what I realized is that what people mean by conversation is actually quite different. And what people are getting from conversations is quite different. You know what? I'll tell this story at the end. That would be, because I want to hear everybody. So let's go to Connie next. Connie.
Yes, I actually consider these meetings, in particular with this format, a type of conversation, which brings me tremendous joy. I love to learn, and I love people that are different from me, especially from different cultures, because it opens up areas that I've never might have looked into more myself. So they absolutely enrich my life. I consider them often like an adventure. I love to go to places, meetings, or parties, or things like that by myself, even a restaurant, because I love to meet new people. And what I'm very interested in, sort of the psychology of people and sort of what makes them tick. So I'm someone that likes to actually ask more questions than talk about myself. And I just leave feeling wonderful. So thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Does anybody else want to share why they value good conversation? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you have not spoken on this question before, and if you would like to share your thoughts. I'm going to give about 10 seconds, and then we will go to, I want to prime for the next question, which is going to be if. So let me just recount, some of the things that people said here. Talked about the flow, the importance of knowing that you can, is a tool for knowing yourself, knowing other people, expanding your context, getting energy, getting validation, being vulnerable, being open, not as a debate, but as an expansion of context, establishing mutual connection, being understood. There are several values that you're getting, values that you're giving at the same time. Now, the question is, if more of us, let's take the extreme situation. We're trying to do a thought experiment here. If everybody knew how to do good conversation and was committed to doing that, what will the world be like? So now this is the time to engage your imagination of saying, how will the world be different if people really engaged in good conversation? Go ahead and type a exclamation mark if you'd like to share. We're going to start with Evanik.
What would the world be like? I mean, I had that Beatles song in my head, Imagine. Um, I think it would be a world where everybody could be free to be who they are. And they could discover, more importantly, you could discover who you are, and people will be free to discover who they are instead of trying to make a good impression or, win an argument. Um, as I'm sorry, I'm gonna mess up his name. Parveen said, um, as Parveen said, a lot of times we do walk into a conversation just with the intent of getting our point across, because we all know that we're right, and our ego tells us we're right, and the other side is wrong, and there's no way that the other side can be right. So I think you could be who you are, you could express who you are without fear or judgment. I think if you had good conversation, you would also be open, like people would be open to new ideas, and there would be more compromise. I know we don't bring politics into it, but as a general thing, could you imagine if our government like listened to each other instead of worried about winning an election? Like and really the focus be on how do we make the lives of American people better? Like if that was the conversation and it was done in genuine interest and genuine trust, like think of the things we could have. If we're going imagination, like we're just going outside of the world of reason, you wouldn't have poverty, right? You wouldn't have people starving. You wouldn't have people in the streets. You have people with mental health issues getting health care that they need. The basics would be, and I think of, Andrew Yang's concept of universal basic income, right? You would live in a world where you could survive. You wouldn't have to worry about survival. And then you can take yourself to the next level and figure out what you really want for yourself in your life. Like you could take the time, sit down and have conversations about that. And I think if you had people that were happy with their lives and happy with who they are, they would be at least happy with how other people are, or accepting of who other people are, even if you don't necessarily agree with them. So that's my utopia world right there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Maxine. Maxine, go ahead.
If we all spoke to each other in the world, we wouldn't have fighting because we would have talked it out before it got to that point. I think NATO would be a lot much better shape. And I think even Russia, they want to be heard. So if somebody would be listening to them, well, how could they bomb them? So I think that is a goal, to have more speaking to one another. And what about all the Middle Eastern countries? They're all fighting and blowing each other up. And well, if they spoke to one another, perhaps they don't have to be friends, but they could listen to one another and things would go much better.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maxine. Next up is Joe, Vanessa, Andrea, and Becky. Joe.
I think that it would be a place that we could actually come to, we'd be able to come to agreement on a lot of different topics, much more. But I also think that it'll allow us to come to rational conclusions as well. The more that we actually are able to engage with one another, I think there would be a lot less speaking, to be quite honest as well. I think we'd all talk a lot less because we would be actually trying to listen more than we would actually be talking. So that there's that aspect of it. I think a lot of times that we're just talking in order to be heard. And that is not necessarily good conversation. So I think that it would be a lot more mindful, and there would be a lot more intention behind the words and the things that we actually discussed. So I also think that there's this other aspect of good conversation as well, is that I think that we would be probably in a place where we wouldn't be as dependent on externals. I really do. I believe that wholeheartedly. Because if you're learning what is truly meaningful in this process, so I would just say that our values would change. Our overall values would change, in the sense that what we would value is more along the lines of each other, because that feedback that would be coming would actually be something that would be beneficial for both you and the other person. So I think the way we value others in this process is also important. So those are just some thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Vanessa, followed by Andrea. Vanessa.
Well, Maxine kind of stole my thunder, where I think there'd be a lot less aggression. There might still be conflict, but mine's slightly different. The fact that you would at least be willing to sit down and communicate, and even if you were like in each other's face, you may have those on the sidelines saying, "Yo, figure it out," or just agree to disagree. You go in your corner, you go over there. Just maybe ignore each other for all eternity, and maybe more people looking out for the underdog. People more skilled at it. Those that maybe don't get a chance to speak up, or you say, well, you'll have maybe a conversation where maybe you can have 50 people in there, and it's more calmer than conversation with 3 people, and the work day may completely alter, because maybe also maybe it'll be more efficient. How much is wasted in miscommunications, miscues. Maybe the temperature would be brought down in a couple of ways, just more calm around people, and also we would actually have solutions and not have a global warming disaster we're in right now. So like I said, it may also be more efficient. So I think and you'll learn a little bit more. But I think the hostility and aggression would go down if even between those other people, the people on the side, like, yo, cut it out, come on, we know better than that, or just maybe focus on something else, or go dance or something, or see a movie, or take a nap.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you. Next up is Andrea, followed by Becky, Judy, Nicole, Jeff, and Joe. Andrea.
Yeah, so I had like 3 things. The first one is not necessarily directly related to your question, but how do you know when you're having a good conversation? And in my brain, I think I know I'm having a good conversation with somebody if we laugh about something. Somewhere in there, sarcasm, as soon as I hit sarcasm, it's like, okay, I know it's going to be a good conversation. The second thing was we need to consider that some people are not interested in conversation. I have a couple of meetup groups that I facilitate, and some people just find conversation like miserable. They like to sit there and listen to other people have it, but they don't want to participate. And we have to make people okay with that, that they can participate. Or, occasionally you ask them, hey, what do you think? And if they say, nothing, then you let it go on, but don't make people feel bad about it. And then the third thing was just sometimes, you need the facilitator, because, you may be something that knows something about both these people, and they're both shy and they're not going to talk about it. So you're the one that goes, hey, Shrikant, you live in New York, and somebody else lives in New York. And Shrikant has a great story to tell you about these people that he had dinner with the other night for 3 hours. And then you just walk away, and I would let you tell that story. But sometimes you need 3 people in a conversation for it to really happen between 2 of the 3 people. So I'm done.
Wonderful point. The value of the catalysts for reaction. Wonderful. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Next up is Becky, followed by Judy. Becky.
So good methods of discourse does not equate all the time to good conversation. And there's a lot packed into that word good. Like, what makes something a good conversation? And it is something you mentioned earlier. Shrikant, virtues, values, because if I have used good methods for discourse, I can be completely transparent. But let's say in a situation of negotiation where I have complete leverage, well, then I will come off as the authoritarian. And it is completely transparent that I would have all the power in that situation. And so if my values are not there and I am not coming at it with compassion, but I am seeing it as extremely clear as what the situation is. But so does the other person sees the same thing. You arrive at very different results. So you can't really separate that. So one's definition of good conversation must take into account his or her values and virtues.
Wonderful, excellent point. I couldn't agree more. The kind of conversation is a means, and the values and virtues are what you're trying to achieve through conversation. So just great point. Next up is Judy, Nicole, Jeff, and Joe. Judy.
So the question again is, how would the world be different if? So
Yes.
the big point here is if.
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, I think that there should be some rule or regulation or law or something that stops people from calling each other names. And I think everybody knows how we denigrate people by calling them names, retard and all kinds of things. Anyway, so that's so disrespectful. So I'm thinking of this song that Aretha Franklin sings, RESPCT, respect. So I think the first one would be more respect. If we respected each other, be great. And the second point that I would like to make, if we had more respect and better understanding of this, we would have more art, more theater, more singing, more laughing, more group dynamics. We would enjoy things together. I think it would be it'd be a wonderful utopia. Yeah, probably, and probably won't have it, but if.
Wonderful.
That's it.
Thank you, Judy.
Yeah.
So the question is, what would the world be like if there is more of good conversation, much more of good conversation?
I want to focus on a specific type of conversation. There's conversation that is really just kind of the exchange of ideas, but I want to focus on conversations where decisions need to be made, because quite often I think that's where disagreement becomes important, because it has implications for all the people involved. And just a couple things about that. So disagreement is essential to be productive in solving any complex challenge or seizing any complex opportunity, but it can also be destructive. And in my experience, the challenges with regard to reasoning things out 100 years or 500 years from now might be greatly reduced if folks really took to heart that nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And that in difficult conversations around decisions that need to be made where people really disagree, if the people who disagree have a certain amount and really at least an adequate amount of mutual respect and mutual regard and mutual trust, then they will find themselves being able to think much more clearly and much more reasonably and arrive in the end, hopefully, at some outcome that both feels better and is better for the both of them. Of course, part of that it also requires folks to at least 51-49, seeking first to understand the other person before, or at least compared to seeking to convince the other person that they're right. And that is enhanced, that ability is increased if 100 years from now, human beings might realize that they really, they're wrong about at least 10% of whatever they think they're right about. And if they could convince themselves of that and really believe it, it would increase their ability to practice a certain amount of intellectual humility that could lead to them being authentically, really genuinely curious about the perspective and the thinking and the perceptions and the ideas of folks with whom they disagree. And if all that was true, I think the world would be a dramatically different place, because I think many of our challenges are as a result of destructive versus productive disagreement.
Wonderful. Very well put. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Next up is going to be Joe. And then we are going to go to the next question. And that's going to be a practical question. What will you do, or what have you found useful that will improve, that has improved your conversation, or what you think will improve your conversation? Just practical ways in which we can improve our conversation. Joe, go ahead.
So
still on the previous one, go ahead.
So yeah, still on the previous question, just really briefly, I'll just hurry up. One of the things, and it's kind of already been alluded to, I think that there would be actually a higher degree of trust amongst each other, because good conversations, and good communication, also you're establishing a level of trust that exists. So it's this, you're listening, but you're also able to there's an authenticity that goes into this, to a good conversation. So then that would therefore kind of allow us to relate to one another in a much more meaningful way. Anyway, I just thought I would add that. I know some people have already said that in so many ways.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Especially when there are disagreements. So but now the question on the table is practical tips. What have you found useful to improve your conversation? How about let's be very practical. What have you found useful to make conversations better? Okay, just please share that. Let's not talk about what might be useful, because we don't know for sure. Something that you have found useful. Praveen, Joe, DLJ, and Katie. Praveen.
So two things. One is keeping sarcasm out of the conversation, like both ways, because I realize a lot of my friends, they grew up on whatever TV sitcoms. They think that's just normal conversation, and it actually gets very tiresome, and it becomes escalating as well. And you really can't, so basically, by me taking sarcasm out, I think over time they mirror who they're talking to. And the second thing is keeping things fact-based and keep taking the feelings out of things. So rather than saying how I feel about something, my value judgment, I just talk about the facts about what we're talking about. And I think subconsciously that makes the conversation and what we're doing longer term, because the people who we're talking to, subconsciously, even if you give someone praise, right, that's also bad too, because subconsciously they know that, well, if they don't keep up their appearances or what they're doing, next day you're not going to feel the same way about them, even if you don't say it out loud. So almost like, it's very, very uncomfortable to be put on a pedestal. And that's kind of what you do when you put value judgments on things. So that's my two takes is no sarcasm and keep the conversation fact-based.
Wonderful. Excellent. I like the point about no sarcasm, because I want to highlight that, because that's a negative. It's like negative of a negative. And many times I've found negative of a negative is far more powerful than anything that you can add. Many times it's the negative which is kind of undercutting everything that you're doing. So no matter, most people think that they can improve by just adding more positives. But many times you make bigger improvement by just cutting out the negative. Thank you. Next up is Joe, DLJ, Katie, Mike, and Andrea, Sharon, and Vanessa. Joe.
So one of the things that I have found to be useful is, and actually Pravina has already kind of spoken to this, is this the use of language that I use, and I like essentially try and temper that as much as possible and frame it in a way that is more objective. And I think that that is that's usually received a lot more than if I'm using an emotional type of response to someone and explaining to them, or if I'm coming from in a place that's really emotional, that may not resonate with someone. But I think that there's, and there is the other aspect of it is being able to separate fact and opinion. So how I'm going to react to a particular person's thoughts or words. I think that that's a very helpful, useful tool as well. But I think also having a set of principles and theories actually that allow you to kind of formulate your own thoughts so that you can then get feedback as to what it is that you're actually trying to you're able to get honest feedback because you're coming from a place where you have a coherent thought of a position, even though this is not coming off like a coherent thought, but where you have a position where you can actually receive the feedback. And I found that, kind of having a set of principles to lean back on as to what you're thinking about is really important in expressing yourself. So those are some things. And the most important thing, though, is and I mentioned this earlier, is to realize how present I am in listening to the other person and how much I'm actually thinking about what I'm going to say. That comparison is actually very important because if I'm thinking about what I'm going to say versus actually kind of just taking in what the person is saying, and I have been in those positions, I found that it's not as fruitful a discussion.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. These are great ideas. So let's just listen to everybody's ideas about what they have found useful, and we'll go from there. So next up is going to be DLJ. DLJ, what have you found useful?
Yeah, so apologies if somebody said this already before, because I kind of tuned out, stopped listening for a bit. I think the most important skill is listening.
Yes.
Joe, you stole my thunder there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, DLJ. And folks, it's okay to repeat because what you're trying to say, because each person, see, good things are worth repeating many times because they have to be done many times as a standard part of things. So like, for example, if DLJ says that listening is important, somebody else can say listening is important and they will add their own things to it. So just go ahead and don't worry about repetition. The question is simply, what have you found useful in improving your conversations? Katie.
I read a book on small talk, and I think it was talking about how often shared circumstances are a little bit better than trying to impress up with adventures. So it might be, maybe one notch above an observation. It might be something like, oh, I should have brought a sweater right now or something. So it's one notch above, like, oh, it's chilly outside. So it's, something that starts the conversation. And then if you're going the direction of grand adventures, things that aren't shared between you, I think looking for cues are really important. Does somebody want you to say, have a dog? Do they want you to talk for a minute on your dog? Do they want you to invite them out to the park and talk for an hour about your dog? Like, looking for cues will help you recognize the difference between those three different scenarios.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Next up is going to be Mike, followed by Andrea. Mike.
Yeah, I'm on the listening train as well, but I might call it more of an active listening that I get to practice while I'm in the queue here. So one thing that has helped is as I'm in the queue, because I kind of know what I want to say, but if I'm really listening to the 3 or 4 people that have come before me, I have to be careful that I'm still not pre-programmed just to get ready to talk, as opposed to, I listened to Joe, what he said, and DLJ, what he said, and then Katie and everybody else. But those words, if I'm really listening to what those 3 are saying, they could influence what I'm about to say. So if we were one-on-one, I think we're kind of learning how to multitask a little bit, where we're taking in the information and we're really paying attention, but at the same time, we could be tweaking our response. And I think that's a skill that takes a lot of practice. You get to do it here when you're in the queue. So I found that very helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I really like that point. And this is an observation that many people have had. It's like waiting in the queue and everybody keeps adding things, and you have to actually listen to it and integrate it with what you had to say, and what you say keeps changing, because the purpose is not for you to just say something, but to actually have a conversation, to add to the conversation, let people know that you've listened to them and add. So it's like the yes and improv principle. Depending on what else has happened, whatever you're planning to do keeps changing, because the yes you're saying yes to more things, and therefore your and is going to be different. Next up is going to be Andrea, followed by Sharon. Andrea. Andrea, you're on mute. Okay, let's see. Okay, let's go to Sharon. Sharon, go ahead.
So this is kind of interesting, because sometimes when I'm in conversations with someone, we'll be talking about a particular topic, and then they'll start to go off almost on a monologue. And it can last a very long time. And normally I would, and maybe it's off topic, oftentimes it goes off topic and into different tangents. And oftentimes I would interject to try to bring it back to what the conversation is and what we're talking about. So it's kind of of interest to me as well. But what I've decided to do when I've been testing this, and I think it works quite well, is I just stop and I really pay attention. And I just listen and I don't speak. And like I said, sometimes it's a monologue and it could go on for quite some time. But while I'm really listening intently, I'm trying to understand what it is they're trying to communicate and why it's so important that they communicate that. And I think it really lends to the conversation, because the person, I believe, feels heard. And sometimes you get some information that you wouldn't normally get.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah, one of the things, and I should have thought of this, because it is something that I try and do, is to repeat back what the person is actually saying. It's doing what you're doing this evening.
Jeff was going to say that. I'm pretty sure Jeff is going to say that immediately after you. Please go on.
I'm glad I got in before him then, because I should have. It should have been the first thing to come to mind. Because here at 52 Living Ideas, that is one of the things you do. You either expand on the points that we're trying to make, because you spot it for what it is right away, or you're repeating back what it is for as a point of clarification. And I think that that's extremely powerful. One, because it makes the person feel like they're being heard if you're doing that, and two, that if you're expanding on something, then you're helping the other person learn a different way of expressing that idea, and maybe in a deeper fashion. Well, probably in a deeper fashion. So I think that's one really powerful technique when you're talking about practically speaking, because in order to do that, you have to be listening. You have to be listening to every point, or the person's going to immediately correct you as to where you went wrong in that point. Anyway, that's a really
wonderful. Jeff, could you elaborate on this? Because you actually explained this point very well, and then add whatever else you want.
Sure. So the technique of reflective listening, some call it active listening, is this ability to explore with somebody what it is that they're saying, as in, can you tell me a little more about that? And then ask them, what else can you tell me about that? And then, which does engender in the person, if you really mean it, that you have a certain respect, regard for their perceptions and opinions, and you really do care about why they think that way. And so that before you even respond, you check it out with them and say, here's what I hear you saying, is that correct? And offer them the opportunity to correct it or restate it. And that is that's the tool that works for seek first to understand before you seek to be understood. And it's very useful. It's very powerful. Sometimes in order to do it, people actually need to write down take notes on what the other person is saying, because it's so hard for them to stop thinking about what their reply is going to be, that they need that tool of actually writing down what the other person is saying in order to be able to then say it back. So those are just some very practical tips on that regard. Some folks have taken the word active and changed it to receptive. So instead of just active listening, where you're just doing these things, receptive listening, where you actually allow yourself to put on their shoes and see the situation from their vantage point, genuinely. Not force yourself to do it, but actually invite yourself to do it and see if you can actually do it. So you can receive their orientation and not just, for example, listen to it, write it down, and parrot it back to them. Anyway, so thank you, Shrikant. I'll jump off of that and just say this, that there are tools like that, like receptive or active listening, that are very powerful and very useful. There are qualities to a good conversation, especially a decision-making conversation, where people do feel respected, they do feel mutually respected and mutually trusted, even if they disagree. And values do come into play in terms of people being able to respect and hold people in high regard. But I can tell you, as somebody who is in conversations a lot with people whose values I have great difficulty, that you really got to work on yourself to hold respect and regard for people with whom you really disagree. And it's not just about methods or approaches. You have different values. You have different beliefs about what's the meaning of life, and everything down from there. So, so that can be difficult. And I want to come back down to the very first thing I said, which is that right now, as well as 500 years from now, if each of us would really take responsibility and be accountable for and nurture our ability to actually understand and appreciate what we are feeling, that to be self-aware, especially with regard to our fears, so that we could then frame a situation to influence how we think about it, which could influence how we feel about it, that would actually give us the ability to exercise those techniques and and potentially increase those qualities that we care about. Our chance, our agency to be able to pull that off goes way up. And so it's the reason why emotional intelligence by Daniel Goleman is such a powerful concept. This idea of self-awareness and self-management, and then of course social awareness and social influence in order to create the relationship and ultimately the quality of the decisions that we actually want to achieve.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joel, for bringing this up. And thank you, Jeff, for elaborating on it, because I do think that this is like the single most powerful idea I know of just simply whenever you're listening to somebody, just say, this is what I understand. Is that correct? I also like Jeff's take on it. Say, can you tell me a little bit more? So that way, they get an opportunity of expanding on it. The thing I always add to it is that whenever I'm speaking, you cannot assume that the other person gets it. So you can ask, could you please repeat? Or, what did you get from what I said? And actually hear that, because it's like a handshake, because you have to understand that the way I see it, each person's context is actually, we are very complicated beings. We are very deep, incredibly rich, magnificent beings. And we have very different context in so many different ways. There's all kinds of stuff going on with them, with people. Things vary across time. So even if you think, I have found this to my surprise always, that even when you're trying, both parties are trying, it is actually genuinely hard to make sure that things get transmitted the right way. But when you're doing it both ways, just like you're showing respect by saying, okay, I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to repeat it back. When you're speaking, when you're saying, okay, what did you get from what I said? You're saying, look, I really care about what I'm saying to you. I want to make sure that you get it. And that completes the handshake. So it's like handshake, I'm handing this to you. Okay, is this it? Yes. And then, do that back. So I really find that very, very useful. Next up is going to be Andrea, followed by Becky. Andrea, go ahead.
Oh, I'm back now. So sorry, I lost my mouse before.
No problem.
Anyway, I'm kind of repeating things that both you and Jeff said, but one of the things that I found valuable in my head is that you kind of have this list of stock responses and you train yourself to use them. And one of them is, wow, that sounds fascinating. Even if it's something that you disagree with, it's still fascinating. The second one is, tell me more about that. What was that like? The third one, which I use this all the time because I'm an instructor, am I explaining myself okay? As opposed to insulting people by saying, do you understand me? Which implies that they're stupid, kind of. And then the best phrase I ever learned from anybody, and I've told other people in the group this multiple times, years ago, I had a boss and he must have gone to some kind of training, because every time I would go to him with a problem, he would look at me and he would say, what would you like me to do? And, honestly, all I really wanted him to do was listen to me whine. So I just thought that was like such a perfect phrase, what would you like me to do? Or, in the case of diplomacy, what would you like to see happen? So I think the point of all of that is the automaticity of it, that you train yourself, that this is your response, is, you have this stock phrase that gathers additional information. So I'm done.
Wonderful. Thank you. I really, really liked your observations. Thank you. And those stock phrases are really not, the thing is that their power is that they are actually very general purpose ways of telling people that you're interested in what they're saying. And you are interested in communicating well to them. And you care about what their intentions are, and all of them are being expressed. And I like the idea of having those phrases. And they're not like, they're very flexible. They're very flexible, and they work very well. Thank you. Next up is Becky.
I would say that first decide if it is a conversation, and that, to Jeff's point, requires listening to the other person, and first trying to understand the other person. You'll figure out, you'll make a judgment call, which requires value, to engage, how long to engage, and when to stop if you engage, because not all dialogue is authentic and it's not a conversation. I think it was Sharon who had mentioned sometimes it's a monologue, and it just looks like people are talking. So so it requires listening and then making that judgment to figure out whether or not the other person is like what's the other person's intention. If it's simply to like if it's extremely dogmatic, well, you can still engage if you like, but the likelihood of being heard on your end eventually is a little lower. So just know that. And the question was, well, how do you make your conversations better? Once again, better, that requires knowing what's bad, what's okay, and what's good, right? Which comes back once again to value judgment. I think a lot of us like to say like, oh, we want to do it rationally, we want to do, but it's like even the interpretation of something as rational requires understanding what your views are, what your assumptions are, as well as the other person's. So it always comes back to like know what your values are, and even your own. Like, are you listening? Are you projecting your thoughts onto someone else? So perhaps the person that's stopping the conversation is you.
Wonderful. Excellent points. Now I'll use this opportunity you're talking about to understand the intention of the other person, or what they are actually trying to do. And so I'll use this opportunity to talk about the story I was about to tell when Praveen was, Praveen brought up a similar point. I've been running meetups in New York for the past 6 years. And when I used to run it in person, you would get between 60 to 80 people showing up every Saturday. There's a lot of people, okay? And I would talk to all of them. And what I found, interestingly, is that actually they were all there for conversation. But what is conversation was very different for them. And I realized that people have 4 different meanings, at least 4 different meanings, completely different meanings for conversation. And they are seeking different things, okay? The lowest kind of conversation is, I call verbal grooming, where just like, apes groom each other with their hands, we groom each other with words. Small talk is mostly about that. It is just showing that it's a way of maintaining social comity. You're not trying to actually communicate anything. You're not trying to say anything. You're basically saying, I'm a nice person, you're a nice person, let's get along. That's all you're doing, and you're doing nothing else. And you have no interest of doing anything more than that. So there are people who are engaged in conversation for that purpose. The second one is that of hierarchies. People want to show that they are at a higher level than you, and they are all, it may be very sophisticated, but that's all they're trying to, it's like positioning themselves is all they are doing, using words, okay? The third kind of conversation only appears to be a conversation. What it is that even people who appear to be in that kind of conversation, when you see people appearing to listen, they're actually waiting to speak. They are actually have no interest in what is being said by the other person. They have something in their heart, something in their mind. They just want to blurt it out. That's all. So it's like, that's the kind of conversations that we did and we do here are what we call joint exploration, where each person is actually interested in the world on their own, and they see the other person is also interested in the world on their own. And they say, oh, if we explore the world together, that will be beneficial to you. So then beneficial to both of us. So with that of saying, so you're actually communicating about the world. If, for example, if the other person points out something that you don't know, something that you're wrong about, your reaction is, oh, I'm learning something new about the world. He's trying to tell me something new about the world. So you're paying attention at that point. It's not about disagreement. It is about saying, oh, they are giving me a value. I am learning. They're doing me a favor. And that is the kind of conversation that we do in our in-person meetups. And that's what we do here. Like, everybody is interested in the topic, and everybody is expressing themselves, and everybody is trying to listen and trying to learn as best they can. So I think that difference is a huge difference. So great point. Next up is Judy, followed by Praveen. Judy, what techniques have you found useful?
I have found many techniques useful, but this particular one that I'm going to talk about is called, it's from a group called Life Orientations. And we used it a lot for team development. And basically they have this golden rule that says, do unto others as they would like to have done unto them, instead of do unto others as you would like to have done unto you. And basically it's to bridge different points of view, to make decisions as a team, not with a leader, not with anybody that's saying this is what we're going to do, but we all make the decision of what are the next steps, or what's the plan, or what's the training going to be, or whatever it is that we're trying to make a decision on. And it's a real good one. It has life orientations like action. Some people are action oriented, other people are more excellence oriented, a lot of some are harmonious oriented, and etc. So there's different values that are connected with this life orientations. And I thought that was really good. It's a real good tool. I just wanted to share with the group.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Next up is Praveen.
So picking up on your social hierarchy comment, like I think there's another version of that beyond as far as like social hierarchy, as far as expertise. I feel like a lot of times these conversations go where you put into little tidbits to show what you know, right? Even if it's not necessarily in the conversation. And I felt, I'm speaking from my own experience, it's really bad, even for the person who's trying to show their expertise, because it prevents you from learning from the conversation. You're always trying to maintain your hierarchy at that point too. I guess at some point, you have to have equal footing, but beyond that, I think it becomes, counterproductive. And also it's almost like you're labeling someone for them, as you're labeling them as whatever, less expertise than you. And then it devolves to like, other things too, like unsolicited advice, things like that. But just in general, that social hierarchy is beyond just the, your title per se. It's like, I know more than you type thing.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So I just wanted to recap what everybody said very quickly, distinguishing between productive disagreements and destructive disagreements, thinking of this as diplomacy, trying to model things for the future, being able to deal with uncertainty, focus, making sure that things are, what you're saying is fact-based, removing kind of sarcasm, kind of name calling, putting people down, using principles so that you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, being present, actually thinking about what you're saying instead of just reacting, listening, using conversation starters, trying to read cues, verbal and non-verbal, actually listening to what the other person is saying and then continuously changing the answers that you may have for them instead of holding on to the answers that you came, the reaction that you came up at some point in the conversation, repeating things back to people, using stock responses to engender kind of more deeper interaction, like tell me more, am I explaining myself, would you like, what would you like me to do? Evaluating what the intention of the other person is, whether and what kind of possible, what kind of conversation is possible in that situation. And then just understanding, what they would like, how they would like the conversation to proceed. So these are some of the things that were said. Now, at this stage, so we've completed the 4 stages. Now, it's time for review. How was this conversation about conversation? What are you taking away from it? So this is just takeaways at the end of the conversation. You can take 2-3 minutes if you want to talk about what you got from it. Because conversation is what we do here in 52 Living Ideas. I think we have completed about close to 1,000 meetups now since COVID started, of 2 hours each. And on an average, maybe if you include the COVID time, on an average between maybe 30 to 40 people. So that's a lot of people and a lot of conversation. So, so this is a good opportunity to kind of sit down and discuss conversation itself. So please let us know how it went. What did you get from it? DLJ, Evanik, Joe, and Judy. DLJ.
I think Praveen might be before me, isn't he?
No, he had gone for the previous answer.
That's true. I wasn't listening. Sorry. Okay, so I think my favorite, to be honest, there was a lot of things, most of the things I thought of before at some point in the other, but there was one bit which I really like because I like categories. So I really appreciated your 4 categories. The first one, small talk, and also the comment about body language being part of it as well. Somewhat important to me as a member of the autistic community. So small talk is like weird for us. And likewise, body language and facial expression is something that we're just bad at. So how to get around that is something I've been thinking about a lot. I don't have any answers yet, but other than maybe starting a school to help autistic people do small talks, I don't know, something like that. Anyway, but yeah, appreciate the 4 categories. So thanks for that. And thanks everybody else, because it was a good, what's the word? Conversation. Yeah.
Thank you, DLJ. Next up is Evanik, followed by Joe. Evanik.
Yeah, so the biggest thing I got is listening, but I think also the question of what is a good conversation, and taking it back. And I think to go into introspection is, am I a good conversationalist? Do I value the person that is speaking? Am I genuinely interested in that person? I think also thinking about, do I so it's a lot of introspection for me. It's like, well, do I, am I listening to speak or listening just to listen? And I think the biggest thing though is like being genuinely interested in the person that's talking, because when you're genuinely interested in the person that's talking, you'll value what they are saying and you'll genuinely listen to them, and you won't worry about being right. And you won't worry about thinking, oh, I have a better point than they do. You'll just genuinely listen to what they have to say. And I think, looking at, I think what is a good conversation? I think that's really subjective, right? In the sense that it's with the person. And that is a really hard question to answer, because one person, it could be 2 people in the conversation, and one person thinks it's a great conversation, and another person thinks this was the worst conversation I ever had, right? And why is that? Maybe that person felt like they couldn't be heard. Maybe that person felt like they couldn't get a word in edgewise, or maybe they just thought maybe they just weren't genuinely interested in you and listening to you. So it's all those things. So a lot of takeaways.
Okay, so I'm going to have conversation with everybody as they're making comments. So firstly, with DLJ, I mean, those categories I've used for some time, and they work pretty well, but I'm not sure that those are the only categories. There is, I think, kind of interaction between two human beings, just even if you take just two human beings, is so intricate, so complex. I'm still trying to get my mind around it, because it's just, the thing is that genuinely, it's like, what goes on in us, other people do not have direct access to. We share the same external reality that we are living in, but our consciousness and what it is doing. And the other point, talking, addressing what Evanik is saying, what is a good conversation changes from like moment to moment. Like, there is a flow of conversation, and like there are a conversation that can be fantastic at point, you can see it go down, and you have to be able to kind of notice that and to say, okay, you know what, this is not good. I need to fix this. And both parties need to do that. And so it takes, it's partly it is being present and continuously evaluating it. But the underlying thing is the respect and I think genuine interest in the other person, because you wouldn't put in the effort to do that. It's a lot of work, I think. It's tremendously enjoyable, but it's a lot of work, a lot of kind of trying to figure out partly what it is doing. Like I've seen people who are very good at conversation. I'm not particularly good, but I've seen people who are very, very good at conversation. What they are able to do is that they're able to actually see where the other person is coming from. Not by the words themselves, but they have they're able to quickly size up what the situation is, where the other person is. And they're speaking not just to the words, they're actually speaking to the person. Something that is behind the words. And that is really, really powerful. Next up is going to be Joe.
I respectfully disagree that you're not a good conversation, I think you're very good. I think most people here would agree with that. That's just something, and that's a fact, not an opinion. In any case, the thing that I really like about this particular meetup is that, we're defining, we think about these things all the time. Like, this idea of suspending our judgment, listening, all these things, being open. But it's important to revisit like what it is. What is a good conversation and why is it important? And then what are we going to do about it? Because it really makes us contemplate what are the characteristics of actually what we're talking about. And then, so when you walk out of here, you're a little bit more aware of if you're not doing something. One of these characteristics. We've thought about them maybe independently, but we don't necessarily always think about this topic per se. So this is why I like this format, is that we really are able to extract the essence of the topics that we cover here, and then able to use that to get a deeper understanding of not only ourselves, but also the topic, at hand, so that we can, help or expand our knowledge. So
can
for
I interrupt you for just a second?
Go ahead, please.
So I mean, this is very good because you've attended several of these. We did the same format for on comprehensivism, one on Carl Jung's ideas, one on Stoicism, and this is the fourth one on conversation itself. And the format, I mean, I can divide it into 8 or 4, but essentially the 4 parts is, one is to get things on the table, get as many things on the table, because what that does is that kind of primes the mind. It's kind of using all our memories, kind of collective memories of everybody, because somebody else's point is going to trigger your memory. So it's getting all of those things on the table. The second part is connecting to your emotions, to your values, and saying, why, what does this mean to you? So that is kind of engaging your emotions. So if in Carl Jung's terms, it is engaging both FI and FE in the sense that you are actually empathically listening to people. You say, oh, look at how he is approaching or she is approaching this topic. How interesting. So you're doing that in full, that's place which is the longest section. Once we've done that, then we are trying to engage imagination, because what happens is that most people kind of take something and say, okay, I'm going to apply it. The importance of imagination is that it underlines for you the scale of what would happen if all of these things came together. And it gives you the full motivation of saying, you know what, this is what is possible. And it actually stretches you to look at things, you're trying to model the future, if you will. You're trying to say, what would happen if this is in massive quantity? Because if that is true, if it is going to make a massive change, then in some quality, it's going to make a change to a conversation that you're going to have. So it gives that big base, long-term base for the next step. And the next step is very practical of saying, so what have you found useful? Or so, what are you going to do? So it's all about kind of concrete. And what it does is that, different people are going to be, better at some of these steps and worse at some of the steps. Some people may find it more difficult to kind of quickly identify what exactly is a good conversation. But when they talk in a full, free-flowing way, they will be able to make those points. Some people are very kind of practically oriented. They're going to be able to get, so it's a way of kind of engaging more people. And because, we have such a great community where so many people are so generous with their thoughts and with, how openly they share what they have learned, that everybody can benefit from that. And it's a way of, I look at it as triangulating. You have so many different consciousnesses trying to look at the same problem from slightly different angles, and you actually understand it better as a result of that. So that's why I like this, this kind of method. And I'm planning to kind of make this as a standard, as one of the discussion formats to really explore things. I will take topics where we have already built a lot of common context. So everything that we've been doing, like, for example, we've been engaging in conversations, that's all behind us. And that's, kind of that's fueling us. Same thing with Stoicism or Jung or comprehensivism. We've been doing this for a long time. So I'll take topics like that and allow us to kind of see the beauty of it and see more applications of it than we've seen before. Go ahead, Joe. You done?
Yeah, no, I'm done.
Okay.
I mean, I think that this is excellent. Thank you.
Thanks. Next up is Judy, Vanessa, and Mike. Judy.
Okay, so the question was, how was this conversation about conversations?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. What are you walking
Okay.
away with? What are your takeaways?
I'm walking away with having visualized everything. And that really was great because I used my imagination as everybody was talking. I was traveling and seeing all kinds of conversations that I was having with other people, successful or not. And it helped me to just reaffirm and reapply things that I already knew, but really hadn't thought about it too much. But by visualizing it with this format that you have, which is excellent, I was able to organize my visualizations in a way that made some sense to it at the end. And as I went through the conversations about conversations. So it was great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Vanessa, what are you walking away with?
Well, I liked how you said, like, people said the model was like a model of a model, like you were able to guide the conversation with a specific intent. And just hearing everyone else's techniques, like, Andrea mentioned the not the takeaways, the stock responses, those things you have in the back of your mind, and hearing everyone else's perspective about what they value as a conversation. I think also by your setup, it reminded me of English classes. Like the first two is like, the initial thing was like the rough draft of the second one, what you value in a conversation. I think, I use the term BSing, whether you're talking about brainstorming or the other one. And like a tactic, I think when like you talk about how conversations lull, is sometimes you see if someone's realizing, indirectly saying you're talking a lot, you kind of restate what they did, but not exactly like, wait a minute. And they realize, wait a minute, I've been going on for 20 minutes here and versus, saying, please give me a word in edgewise. So like, I appreciate everyone's perspective and very enlightening, and the knowledge base is a little bit bigger. Hopefully I'll remember come tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. Next up is Mike A.
Yeah, I'm walking away with a feeling of affirmation of the format, Shrikant, in that I'm getting spoiled where, I'm here, I'm looking at all these boxes and listening to a group of really smart people, and I don't feel an ounce of agenda coming from the other side, which is a conversation I don't like to have anymore, because out in the real world where I interact with people, when there is somebody who's coming at me with an agenda, so it's kind of a one-sided deal. There's an equal sign, but it's really an inequality. You know what I mean? I sense that right away now. It's like I'm starting to develop it. I have friends who make homemade wine and it's delicious. And now I don't want to taste any other wine. And it's a very similar analogy here with these conversations where, again, I don't ever sense a negative agenda coming from anyone. I don't always agree, and I'm sure people don't agree with me, yet I can turn it on and off as I wish. But out in the real world, sometimes when I sense that one-sided agenda coming, my radar goes up. So I'm leaving again with a sense of affirmation that I really appreciate this format.
Wonderful. Mike, can you tell people about the next meetup, next coming Wednesday?
Yeah, I think it dovetails nicely tonight. We were talking about the importance of being an active participant. If you think of the creative process or being in the arts, there's kind of two seats. You're either on the stage or you're in the audience. And I think we're going to discuss a great deal about the importance of participating in general, having your voice heard. And then, we titled it, All the World is a Stage, from the Shakespeare poem, Come Play. And I think we can make the point, or I'm going to try to make the point, that stage is not always a literal stage, that you can find places to express yourself anywhere, including here tonight, or in a lot of places that you get a chance. But I'd also like to dig in a little bit as a community to find out, are there places where you want to perform or you want to find yourself participating and you're not? There's a block there for some reason. So it's kind of an expansion on the meetup we did about the comfort zone. So in general, getting yourself to participate actively, and also if there is a stage that you want to be on someday and you're not there, we can kind of work our way toward that collectively.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. And thank you very much, everybody. This is such a wonderful meetup. I really like everybody's comments. And I think this format is working really well. So I look forward to taking up the next topic that we've been working on quite a bit. I have several ideas. I want to do something on Jordan Peterson. There is something I want to do something on language, but I'm really scared to do that. It's like, so I don't know. I'll look through all the meetups that we've done, and I will try to take very large themes that we can talk about. So thank you very much, everybody. See you soon. Bye. Good night.